First of all, I would also like to thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure, in particular Maria, who made it possible that I can come. So
I thank you.
I'm really grateful. And maybe we switch now to this slide. So the idea of the presentation is shortly summarized already in the title. It's economic growth, structural change, and transformation. And I think we use these notions today very synonymously, but they have different meanings, and it's important also to understand what is behind these concepts. And I was recently bumping into this American philosopher, Richard Rorty, and he was saying a lack of commitment in practice easily leads to hallucinations in theory. And I think this is also one of the problems of economic theory, that we sometimes are really more or closer to hallucinations and not to the reality. And if we go through this topic, growth, development, and transformation, you will see what I mean. Okay, so the starting point and objective of my thoughts today is that our prevailing understanding of sustainable design of economic systems is the idea of substitution. And this idea very much falls short of a deeper intellectual penetration of the real change processes which are going on. So I think, and this is in bold letters here, that substitution is hardly sufficient for the development, and it's insufficient for transformation. And to understand why, we have to go deeper and see what these concepts mean. So the example that I have chosen is the bioeconomy. I'm not very clear whether you are familiar with the concept. What is the bioeconomy? Did you heard about this before? It's the idea that today we can replace most of our ingredients built on fossil ingredients by new ingredients which build on bio-based ingredients. That's the idea. And if you look at this literature, you see very much, and I know this is also true in Brazil, that efficiency considerations are dominant. It's always, if you talk with engineers, it's the question of scaling up technology. So if you can scale up a technology, it will become finally successful and can be introduced in a competitive way into markets. And our neoclassical mainstream economic theory is also working in the same direction. We usually we use not efficiency directly in microeconomics, yes, but we talk about economic growth, about raising income level, we talk about securing jobs, we talk about international competitiveness. And the sustainability orientation today is present, but it plays only a side role, and it has to align itself into this framework. Let me give you an example, and I'm sure that you are familiar with this picture here. It's an isoquant. And I have just replaced on the axis the ingredients. So we have now the oil-based inputs on the vertical axis, and we have the bio-based inputs on the horizontal axis. And you know what is happening. We make a cost-efficient decision. We have this cost line, which is describing the relative price between bio-based and oil-based inputs, and then we choose the optimal technology, which is describing how much of the bio-ingredients we are using. Now the plan is to increase the share of the bio-based inputs, and there are two options for this. Either the government is subsidizing the bio-based ingredients, or we have innovation, process innovation. We make the bio-based ingredients cheaper. And what is happening is displayed on this picture here. So we have a new price line, and the economy is step by step adapting to the new optimum where we have a higher share of bio-based inputs. And I think, and well, I'm sure this is a very difficult view on technological change. It's a mechanistic view which is not paying tribute to what is really going on. So this is just the explanation of what we have seen. We are increasing step by step the bio-based inputs in the economy. And in this world, then economic growth, future economic growth becomes possible. It's just more of the same. And it's literally more of the same. So I was introduced as being, as coming from the University of Hohenheim in Stuttgart. Maybe you have heard about Stuttgart. It's the headquarters of the international car industry. So there's Mercedes, there's Porsche, there's Bosch. They have all the headquarters in Stuttgart. So we are very car focused area, region in Germany. And they also have the plan to use bioeconomic inputs for the car. And I just found a week ago in an engineering journal this picture here where they show what are the potentials for the bioeconomy inputs in producing cars. So you can, for example, use biolubricants, you can use bioplastics, biocarbon fibers, and so on and so on. But in the end, what you see is a car. It's not changing at all. It's more of the same. The technology is exactly what it has been before, just different parts are replaced by bio-based inputs. So the question is, sorry? No? Okay. Or I think this is a technology naive idea, and it is confronted with the famous rebound effect. So if we finally save the oil because we use more of the bio-based inputs, this will have an immediate impact on the price level, which means that we finally have lower oil prices and we find the oil in some other economic activities, and from an environmental point of view, nothing has changed. This is also the reason for the recently emerging growth critical approaches, because in the neoclassical way of conceptualizing economic growth, it is clear that there's a correlation between the emission of greenhouse gases and economic growth. So if you want to get rid of the greenhouse gas emissions, you have to get rid of economic growth. And this is the idea of zero growth theories or of the other growth theories. So this is not focusing on development, it's more of the same, and it's not focusing on transformation. So now the banner should appear. Is this all economics can say? If I would say yes, then it would be already the end of the presentation today, and it's only 5 minutes, so you can imagine that I have some more ideas. And this is also exactly when my relation to Maria came in. It was in 2008 when the Schumpeter Conference, the 12th Schumpeter Conference, was hosted in these rooms at the Universitat Federal de Rio de Janeiro, and it was a marvelous success, and we edited this book here. And I'm also very proud that I was working together with the first female president of the International Schumpeter Society, and this is also part of a transformation, I think, but it's not the part of the transformation I'm talking about today, but it was an important step also for our society. So what I'm suggesting, and was basically my major field of occupation over the last 20 years, evolutionary economics. And here in evolutionary economics, we have replaced the optimization approach of standard economics and have instead used learning as a major mechanism for the firms to improve their competences, to change technologies, to introduce new technologies. So in a way, what is price competition in the standard textbook economics version was replaced by innovation competition. And I just move forward one slide. Maybe you have seen this guy before, Joseph Ale Schumpeter, and in this quote from his book from 1943, he's saying, if you manage to master innovation competition, you don't have to care about price competition. Price competition is like knocking at the door, but innovation competition is bombing the house. So if you can bomb the house, why should you knock at the door? So it's a much powerful way to be successful in the economic system if you are an innovation-oriented company, because then the price doesn't matter. Your clients are always interested in the best quality of the products and the ingredients. So in this idea, innovation takes a complete new meaning. it is no longer the quantitative focus on growing income per head, but it's the qualitative dimension of economic development. And here my example is always from Germany, but after World War II, the Germans were of course very poor, and today we have about 5 times of the incomes of our grandparents. And you might seen old movies from Germany in the 1950s. Everybody was driving what was later also produced in Brazil, a Volkswagen Käfer, the Beetle. So today we have 5 times of the income, but we do not have 5 Volkswagen Beetle in our garages. We have different cars, we purchase different products, we learn different knowledge at the universities. Everything has changed, and this is qualitative development, and this is not included in the idea of economic growth, which is a quantitative figure alone. And if you start to work in these notions of evolutionary economics, you also transform already the simple neoclassical mechanical systems in very complex evolutionary economic systems. So you don't have a representative firm, you don't have a representative market, homogeneous goods, but it's about heterogeneous companies, different industries coexisting. And this has also a big advantage. It makes the economic system per se more resilient. Because if there's a problem in one sector, the other sectors might compensate for the difficulties that you have in this industry. And this is, as I mentioned, a major focus of my work, and a good share of the work I have done together with a colleague from France, Paolo Sabiotti, and we have developed a new growth model. It's not only growth, but it's economic development, which is analyzed here. And basically the idea of economic development follows a sequence of industry life cycles, which are displayed here in the upper left graph on the figure. So you see that at the beginning there's only one industry existing. We have many startups. The entrepreneurial phase is very pronounced, but then there's a shakeout and we are consolidating. But this is not the end of development, because when we see the consolidating phase, new industries start to emerge, triggered by innovations. And they are generating new economic dynamics. Here you see the development of the jobs in these economic systems. And obviously, due to automatization, to the scaling up processes, due to mergers and acquisitions, you see that the jobs, the employment in the first industry is declining by technological progress. But the new industries, they generate new jobs. So the overall development is positive. And in the long run, it's a simulation model, so we can calculate all kinds of different mechanisms and variables in this model. If you take the long-term development, long-term growth becomes possible. We don't need an exogenous shock. It's not like technology force like manna from heaven, but it's something which is created inside the model. So we don't tell the model to produce industry life cycles, but it's the combination of search processes, of innovation competition, and of also price competition in mature industries. So this is an endogenous mechanism that was created. And now you can use this model, and I think also a good friend of ours, Mariana Mazzucato, is suggesting this with their mission orientation. So in Europe, we have a new commissioner in the European Commission since 2 years now, Ursula von der Leyen, and she's suggesting, she's very much following the ideas of Mariana Mazzucato. She talks about the man on the moon moment, but now it's green growth. So the government, the European Union, is suggesting that they support the emergence of green industries in the future. So this finally will lead to a dominance of green jobs, and we will move into green growth. So I think, and this banner should be away again, evolutionary economics already makes a big difference. So we see these qualitative changes. We can also see that the economic system in its appearance is changing. So it's not more of the same. We observe that different things are appearing, new industries are appearing, and behind the emergence of the new industries, there's a very famous idea. I'm sure that you were confronted with this idea earlier. It's the idea of innovation systems. So innovation systems is the combination of the different actors in an economy, not only firms, but government laboratories, universities, and they all interact and they create what is called the innovation system, which is very different from state to state and explains a lot of the innovation performance of economic systems. However, there's another side of the innovation system coin, because also features that we do not want to see in the future, they tend to linger, they are surviving in our new sectors. So for example, environmental degradation, not necessarily disappearing, and also economic inequality is not necessarily disappearing. It's something which is still the outcome of the system. So I think what is mentioned here, that it remains unclear. Well, we have this government, the mission orientation, they tell us that we have to change to green, but it's not coming from inside the system. It's not an endogenous change in the system. And for that reason, I think now in the 20s of the 21st century, we have also to move forward and to change what we have thought for a long time to be the holy grail of evolutionary economics, and we have to move forward and to transform ourselves again. So for this reason, I had a closer look at the concept of innovation systems. And I found this description here from 97, so it's already quite old, 20 years old. And it says here, an innovation system can be thought of as a system which creates and distributes knowledge, utilizes this knowledge by introducing it into the economy in the form of an innovation, diffuses it. So this is what I already told you. And then the decisive sentence is, it transforms it into something valuable. For example, international competitiveness and economic growth. Here, the two targets of neoclassical economics appear again. It's about international competitiveness and economic growth. So when innovation systems were developed, the idea was really to get over this difficult period. Basically in Europe in the 1990s, Germany was the sick man of Europe with a high unemployment rate because of all these new industries developing in Eastern Europe and finally in China with low labor costs, and all the production moved to the east. And that was a problematic situation. And if you go into price competition, you could say, okay, then the wages in Germany should go down to the wages in China. But I think that would be not a very good solution for the German economy and for the German citizens. But the alternative is then Schumpeter, the innovation competition. So if you master innovation competition, you don't have to care about price competition, about low wages, because then you have the technologies which are really superior and there's a worldwide demand of it. And it was a successful strategy. But today we have to think differently about what is something valuable. And we have to include also sustainability orientation into this. So this is basically mentioned also on this slide. The boundaries of the system orientation are too tight, too narrow in the innovation systems literature. We do not include natural systems, the biodiversity or whatever. We focus only on economic system. And this is difficult if we want to transform the system towards sustainability. So the question is, what is important now? And I think it's the transformation approaches which matter. And they have a good share of evolutionary economics ingredients inside, but it's more. So an important feature of complex systems is the following. They are characterized by so-called tipping points and phase transitions. And I'm not sure whether you heard these notions before. I started by introducing complex systems by their feature of resilience. They are more stable towards shocks. But if they surpass certain thresholds, they can undergo what physicists call a phase transition, and what you observe after the phase transition is something completely different. Everything is different and it's irreversible. And economic systems have surpassed these tipping points several times. So when we started to become settled in agriculture and we are no longer hunter and gatherers, the whole life has changed completely. And probably then at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, everything has changed from our agricultural orientation before. So we work in new jobs, we work with artificial light, no longer the seasons of the year which shape our daily life. The family life has changed, everything was different, irreversibly different. And then Henry Ford was introducing the assembly belt at the beginning of the 20th century, and the whole production system again in all industries has changed, and the idea of mass production emerged. And not only in industry, also in services. So we have mass tourism, for example. So everything was focusing on the already mentioned economies of scale. And then the computers turned up and changed the production system again tremendously. And I think the sustainability transformation should be the same. And here I would like to go back to the example of Germany. So what you see, I hope the mic is working also, I have to stand up, is the GDP per head development of Germany over the last 200 years. So we start very late with industrialization in Germany, and the income started to increase gradually, but if this trend would not have changed, we would have now probably this income per head figure, which is maybe 3 Volkswagen Beetles in the example from before. But we have 5 or 6 Volkswagen Beetles. So what happened here? Here, the German government and in many other places of the world, they have introduced a vicious circle into the economic system. It was the so-called period of Wirtschaftswunder, we say in Germany, and economic historians say it's the golden age of capitalism. It was when the industry was extremely hungry for young talents. And the government started to introduce a lot of new universities in their countries in management and in engineering. And these new trained young people were very creative. They created new industries, they created higher income, and they created also new demand for these products. So it was a positive feedback, and the economy was growing and growing. There was no limit of growth in these first years after World War II in the German economic system. So really the incomes were skyrocketing. And this is quite interesting because standard economics don't like the positive feedback effects. They are destabilizing economic equilibria. But if we want to surpass such a tipping point and to rearrange the whole setting, the architecture of the economic system, we have to go through this process. And these tipping points, this is also very important, are not a feature of social systems alone. They are actually most famous in climate research. They are the earth scientists like Rockström et al., which talk about the planetary boundaries. And they are very clear that we are now at the beginning of the 21st century very close to several of these planetary boundaries. And if we cross these planetary boundaries, the climate system will also change irreversibly. And this is not a good idea for us as humans, because this will change completely everything with unknown consequences. We don't know whether the so-called climate catastrophe will leave something for us humans that we can survive on the planet. So it's definitely a very critical situation. And for me, the consequence then is what is mentioned in the last sentence here. We have to cross the tipping points of our economic systems towards sustainability before we cross the tipping points of the planetary system and we end up in the climate catastrophe. So how can we do this? This obviously is something which is quite difficult and uncertain, and my suggestion is again to think about, can we install such a virtuous circle in our economic system? And I think yes, we can. So what I'm drawing on this picture here is my own indicator about how sustainability has decreased over time with industrialization, and we are now moving downwards to the area where we can very likely cross the planetary boundaries. So we have now to make a severe change of the overall development and get into this upward development. And how can this be done? Well, we have seen in the evolutionary economic structural change tradition, there's the idea of a top-down management that we install the green industries. And this is obviously not a bad idea, but I think given the time horizon of these developments, it is working much too slowly. We have to accelerate these developments. And the idea is that and this is maybe also a shortcoming of evolutionary economics, the strong focus on the supply side, we have to include the demand side as well. So it is the avant-garde consumer which is creating opportunities for the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur is widening the possibilities for consumption, so other consumers move into this area, and then the niche is growing. Further companies, entrepreneurs moved into this area, and finally, if it is going well, it can become the mainstream. I give you an example which is not convincing for Brazil, unfortunately. I know that I also admire the Brazilian and the Argentinian meat, so it's wonderful to eat meat and it's very tasty, but it's also one of the sources of the climate greenhouse gas accumulation in the atmosphere, that we have so many husbandry, so many animals, and this is something that needs to be changed. So 20 years ago in Germany, maybe nowadays in Brazil, if one of the children in a family would have told the mother or the father, I become a vegetarian, then it was a big family catastrophe. What shall we cook for Christmas? And so this is something which is very difficult to be integrated in family life. Now, 20 years later, it's mainstream. So not all the Germans are vegetarians, by far not, me included, but we have reduced strongly the consumption of meat. So maybe meat one time per week or so. Even in steakhouses and in McDonald's restaurants, they offer vegetarian meals. This has become the mainstream. So everybody is doing this. And this has a big effect on climate, on greenhouse gas emissions. And I think this is an example which can be reproduced in the mobility sector, in the textile sector, every sector where consumers are very powerful and can enforce these changes which are already there. So we have all these alternative materials already existing, alternative organization of the traffic and so on, but they're very small. But they need to be connected in innovation networks so that they reach the critical threshold and finally become the mainstream. So that's the suggestion. So then we have to think a little bit deeper what is behind these changes. How do consumers start to think differently in this process? And there's a big, actually he's today celebrating his retirement in Pisa, Giovanni Dosi. He introduced the idea of innovation, of technological paradigms in the 1980s. And here he was already mentioning something which then was, I think, forgotten, but he talked about heuristics. Because when we search about new technological solutions, we do not search the whole space which is possible, but we are framed by certain heuristics. And these heuristics are very difficult to be changed. They are implicit in our decision making, but we have to make them probably explicit and try to focus on these things. And here are a few examples of the most popular 20th century general search heuristics. So it's the unlimited availability of fossil resources. So nobody was really taking care when developing new technologies about the energy. Energy was there, it was available. So this also means, for example, when you design a new supermarket or a shopping mall, it can be outside the city. The only thing that you need to organize is parking lots for the clients. They will come by car. And I think for the 21st century, this will not work anymore, but you should think about different forms of the organization. Then meat as the most desirable component in diet, or mass production to exploit economies of scale. We know that the bioeconomy very often is a decentralized economy. And decentralization is very much at odds with scaling up. You need smaller units. But there are ways out of this. Individual mobility as a dominant traffic mode is mentioned here. And the prevailing norm, which is included in all these heuristics, is increasing income per head. So what are the alternatives? In the 21st century, I think an important alternative comes from digitalization. Digitalization makes it possible that we have small-scale, decentral technologies which are administered centrally by one central unit. But if you know that the major cost-driving factor are labor costs, then you can, of course, run 25 small biorefineries with the same amount of persons than you run one big oil refinery. So that does not make a big difference anymore. So in my eyes, real digitalization in the 21st century is the enemy of industrialization. It's just showing that we can downscale the production units and we can exploit decentral units, we can implement the circular bioeconomy, circular economies and so on. We can also implement new forms of consumption like the sharing economy. All these points which are mentioned here play an important role when we start to transform our economic system. So the increasing income postulate will not vanish from the list of targets. It is, of course, a desired list of our economic decision-making that we increase the income. But at the same level, we introduce the sustainability orientation. So let me make a few conclusions at this point. Do I have still some time?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we need to redesign the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s innovation system. And I can give you a nice example. I mentioned Stuttgart is a car region, but the government of Württemberg, the land, the state, is very much concerned that cars might not have a very brilliant future. So what is next in Baden-Württemberg? So they have started to a round table and have invited the participants from industry and also some scientists. I'm also a member of this committee. So the idea is to redesign the innovation system. And my impression is it's not a good idea to invite the old industry, because what was happening? I was also talking to them, like to you, about the transformation, about new possibilities. And after a while, it was the director of Bosch. He was standing up and says, listen, we are earning 70% of the income in this country. So we want to speak 70% of the time in this meeting, and we don't want to listen to this professor all the time. But I think the government was clever enough that they told them, we don't finance and pay for your structural change. Because we had this big crisis in the car industry, Volkswagen, the Dieselgate, and they were not in a very powerful position. But in order to reorganize this innovation system, I think we should invite to these round tables, which in general are a good idea. We should invite civil society organizations. We should invite involved persons who have new ideas. We should invite the young entrepreneurs. We should invite students. Because, for example, in my class in Stuttgart at the university, most of the students still think it's a very good idea that when I finish my study program, if I have my certificate in the pocket, I will apply for a job at Bosch or at Mercedes. I will get a good income. I will have not to work enough. And I tell them, you have to become an entrepreneur because the big companies will not change it. You will first have to develop these ideas and they might become interested to you. But it's hard because an entrepreneur is not working 40 hours a week, but it might work 60 or 70 hours, and he might not earn a good income the first 3 years. He might earn nothing. So it's really tough. But I also see that many of the middle managers, which after university started in these large industrial companies, they become frustrated and they move out again because they cannot realize their good ideas. And I think another example, which is very convincing, shows that there's a future for the small companies, the entrepreneurial companies, and large industry. And you probably all know the producer of the vaccine during the corona pandemic. It was a small company from Germany, not from Baden-Württemberg, from Rhineland-Palatinate, called BioNTech. BioNTech, it was actually a very nice story, a company founded by 2 Turkish migrants, a pharmaceutical company, and they followed a trade in pharmaceutical research the large companies don't want to go, the mRNA trade. And they say, we can do this. And finally, they were successful in developing this vaccine. But then, this small company could not diffuse and distribute the technology to the world. They need a large partner from the industry who knows how to do the clinical tests, the production, the diffusion, the logistics, and all this. And I think this is something which can be a role model for the transformation towards higher degrees of sustainability, that we have all these already existing good ideas in the startups, and they have to connect with the large industry to roll out the technologies, because of course the transformation will not happen in a garage somewhere in a small city, but then it has to become a world market, and everyone on this planet has to follow these ideas. So I think that's the major message that I would like to give. The established stakeholders suffer from what we call in economics, in industrial economics, the replacement effect. So the monopolist thinks, why should I introduce a new technology? I'm successful, I'm the world leader. And then somebody else is introducing this technology and he might be wiped away overnight. And this, of course, is something that the large industry is also threatened by. So they should start to develop new communication channels to absorb these new approaches, because there will not be enough time for them to wait until they will manage these technologies. And I don't see any movement, in particular when I talk about the German industry at this moment. So they need the new impetus and a strong competitive force from the startup companies. Sometimes, and this is the last sentence, I'm really amused a little bit if I see really big companies like Bosch. They are leading in many parts, but they are scared by a small startup company from 10 students. They say, oh, they can hurt us or something. Probably they can never hurt them, but they should work together and exploit the ideas together and start to change and to begin with the transformation. Thank you very much.